I choked on my fermented root beverage, spraying violently purple liquid across the pristine surface of my command desk. My tertiary eyelids blinked in rapid succession, desperately trying to clear my vision as I stared at the live security feed. It had to be a malfunction. I slammed my four-fingered hand onto the console. Computer, run diagnostic on the waste recycling monitors. I demanded, my secondary voice box vibrating with a panicked frequency. Diagnostic complete, all systems functioning optimally, the neutral digital voice replied. I leaned closer to the glowing screen, my dorsal spine stiffening until it physically ached. It was impossible. This was the grinder, the most soul-crushing punishment detail in the entire Galactic Confederation. It was designed to break the spirits of the most stubborn, insubordinate cadets in the military. Yet, on my screen, the punishment detail was not suffering. They were laughing. And at the center of the chamber, knee-deep in biological waste, was the human. Cadet Maya Westbrook had been on my station for exactly 2 hours. I slumped back into my command chair, grabbing a wiping cloth to clean the sticky purple mess off my uniform. To understand the sheer impossibility of what I was witnessing, you have to understand what happened earlier this morning. I had stood in the arrival bay, core arms clasped behind my back in the formal reception stance. The transfer shuttle had docked with a pneumatic hiss, delivering the latest problem child from the core worlds. First impressions were crucial when establishing dominance hierarchies, especially with humans. They were practically newborns in galactic terms. They had only joined the Confederation 60 years ago, yet they acted like they could reinvent procedures that had been established over millennia. Her file was a nightmare of behavioral warnings. It cited a persistent pattern of creative insubordination and disruptive problem-solving. The airlock cycled open, and Cadet Westbrook stepped onto Delta Station. I had to suppress a derisive snort when I saw her. She was even less impressive in person than in her holographic file. She was barely 5'7", possessing none of the natural chitin armor of the Vexor, nor the imposing physical height of the Zolarians. She was just a fragile human female with dark hair pulled back in a regulation knot. Worst of all, she had a slight smirk on her face. "Cadet Westbrook, reporting for reassignment, sir," she said. She saluted with perfect form. Her voice was completely steady, lacking the usual tremor of fear that accompanied arrivals at the grinder. "Follow me," I ordered, deliberately refusing to return her salute. I wanted her to know exactly where she stood from the outset. As we walked the long, sterile corridors toward my office, I noticed her eyes darting around. She was not fearful or downcast like most broken cadets. She was alert, memorizing the locations of maintenance panels and the faces of passing guards. It was deeply unsettling. When we reached my office, I did not offer her a seat. This was a standard psychological tactic that worked on almost every species in the galaxy. "Your file makes for interesting reading, Cadet," I began, letting my secondary voice box add a threatening, subharmonic undertone. "You show a blatant disregard for established procedures. You question superior officers. You implement unauthorized solutions to standard training scenarios. I believe in finding the most effective approach to each situation, Commander," she replied calmly. She stood at parade rest, completely unbothered by my towering presence. "Your beliefs are irrelevant here," I snapped. "The Confederation operates on standardized procedures refined over thousands of years. Your species' arrogance in thinking you can improve on these perfect systems is exactly why you are here." Usually, this was the exact moment where cadets began their desperate defense. They would offer excuses, apologies, or beg for a second chance. Maya Westbrook simply nodded once. "Effective immediately, you are assigned to waste recycling maintenance," I told her, waiting for the horror to set in. "You will serve 6 standard shifts beginning today. Perhaps physical labor in the biowaste vats will help you appreciate the value of following instructions." Humans were notorious for their highly sensitive olfactory systems. The biowaste tubes smelled like rotting methane and sulfur. Even the Mongolian cadets, who lacked noses entirely, requested transfers after a week on tube duty. Instead of protesting, Maya's eyes actually brightened. "Understood, Commander," she said. "Will I be working solo or with the current detail team?" "There are 4 other cadets currently on punishment detail," I replied, momentarily thrown off balance by her enthusiasm. "You will report to Sanitation Chief Gorks." "Thank you, sir." "Is there anything else?" she asked. "Dismissed," I muttered. As she turned to leave, I felt a sudden, irrational need to break her confidence. "You humans are only tolerated in the Confederation because of your adaptability in combat," I called out. "But Delta Station is not a battlefield, Cadet Westbrook. It is a place of absolute order and rigid discipline." She paused at the door, glancing back over her shoulder. "With respect, sir, every situation contains the potential for improvement. It is simply a matter of perspective." When the door sealed behind her, I actually laughed out loud. I had pulled up the waste recycling monitoring feed right then, eager to watch the exact moment the smell hit her lungs. I wanted to see her confidence shatter the second she was handed a standard issue scraping tool and told to clean the secondary filtration membranes. I had given her 2 days before she would be begging for a standard assignment. That was 2 hours ago. Now, I was staring at a live feed that defied the laws of galactic physics. "Audio," I barked at the computer. The sound of the recycling chamber flooded my office. I expected to hear the squelch of sludge and the miserable groans of punished cadets. Instead, I heard a synchronized hum of activity. "And that is exactly why we are switching to a rotational system," Maya's voice echoed through the chamber speakers. I watched as she stood next to Luz, a hulking Dromarian cadet whose 4 massive arms were covered in green sludge. Dromarians were notoriously strong, but they possessed terrible stamina. "Your species has superior upper body strength," Maya explained, pointing at the massive alien. "But your back muscles fatigue much faster under continuous strain. Quig here has the exact opposite biological configuration." She pointed to a squat, heavily armored alien on the other side of the vat. "You do the heavy extraction for 20 minutes, Maya instructed the giant. "Then you swap with Quig for the precision cleaning. That gives your dorsals time to recover while he handles the brute force lifting." The Dromarian looked highly skeptical. Previous sanitation chiefs had never bothered with anatomical arrangements. They just pointed at the slime and told the cadets to suffer. "That is because the commanders are only thinking about punishment, not efficiency," Maya said, effortlessly reading the alien's mind. "We are all stuck in this room regardless. We might as well get it done right and fast." She pulled a makeshift device from her belt and handed it to him. It looked like 2 standard cleaning rods fused together with engineering tape. "Look at Section 3, Maya continued. "It is already 40% cleaner than it was this morning." I frantically swiped my console, pulling up the environmental sensors for Section 3. My third eyelid twitched. She was right. The contamination levels in that sector were plummeting at a rate I had never seen in 27 cycles at this station. I switched the camera angle to get a wider view of the chamber. What in the name of the 7 moons was happening down there? Cadet Plex, a Vexarian notorious for his aggressive and sullen attitude, was currently suspended upside down over a primary filtration coil. He was actually laughing. He and a Quantillion cadet were working in perfect tandem, operating a makeshift pulley system they had rigged out of loose pipes and utility wire. "That is it, Plex," Maya called out from across the chamber. "If you get that sector clear before the end of the shift, we all win the challenge." "Challenge?" I whispered to myself, my claws digging into my desk. As if the computer had heard my confusion, The camera panned to the far wall of the chamber. Someone had used a piece of white chalk to draw a massive, crude scoreboard on the dark metal paneling. It displayed a grid tracking the number of clean sections. Today's date was pitted directly against the station's historical averages. They were playing a game. She had turned the grinder into a sport. The current team was already 63% above the maximum recorded efficiency. I zoomed the camera back in on Maya. She was now standing next to the youngest cadet on the detail, a highly nervous Xylarian female. Xylarians had incredibly long, dexterous fingers, making them perfect for intricate mechanical work. But this cadet had been paralyzed by the psychological disgust of biowaste duty. See, if you approach the valve from this angle, you avoid the splashback completely, Maya explained. She demonstrated a fluid, flicking motion with her wrist that I had never seen in any training manual. It bypasses the pressure seal and reaches the secondary nodes that always get missed. But the Confederation manual explicitly states we must follow procedure Delta 7 for membrane cleaning, the Xylarian objected timidly. Maya flashed a bright, dangerous grin. The manual was written by some bureaucrat on a core world who never actually had to do this job. Trust me, this way works much better, and it is twice as fast. Watch. She demonstrated the wrist flick again. Even through the grainy security feed, the results were undeniable. The heavy biological membrane peeled away perfectly clean, requiring exactly half the physical effort. How did she figure out the fluid dynamics of a K-class waste valve in 2 hours? I muttered, my voice barely a croak. But the most shocking detail of all was the recycling tubes themselves. These massive pipes were perpetually coated with a dark film of biological residue. It was a fact of life on Delta Station. You could never get them truly clean. Yet, as the camera panned across the room, the pipes were gleaming. They were actually reflecting the overhead lights, showing their original metallic surface for the first time in a decade. I suddenly noticed a dark figure standing in the shadows of the monitoring alcove. It was Chief Gorks. Gorks was a veteran sanitation officer, a Noxian with a cluster of facial tentacles that usually twitched with sadistic pleasure when he watched cadets suffer. He was known as the cruelest supervisor on the station. I waited for him to step forward and crush this unauthorized rebellion. I watched him march out of the alcove, his heavy boots echoing on the metal grating. The laughter in the chamber instantly died. The alien cadets froze in terror. Cadet Westbrook, Gorks barked, his voice echoing wetly through the room. Maya did not flinch. She slowly wiped a streak of green slime from her forehead and turned to face the massive Noxian. Yes, Chief? These methods are completely unorthodox, Gorks sneered, gesturing his tentacles at the makeshift pulley system and the unauthorized scraping tools. You are violating 17 different maintenance protocols. But it is highly effective, Maya replied smoothly, not breaking eye contact. Isn't that what actually matters? I held my breath. Gorks was going to throw her in solitary confinement. He was going to add 3 weeks to her sentence. Your quarterly evaluation is coming up next month, isn't it? Maya asked casually, leaning against a gleaming metal pipe. Gorks stopped in his tracks. His facial tentacles paused their angry writhing. Imagine reporting a sustained efficiency improvement of over 50% to high command, Maya continued, her voice dropping to a conversational, almost conspiratorial tone. They wouldn't care about the protocols. They would only see the numbers. That would look pretty phenomenal for a supervisor seeking a promotion to the core worlds, wouldn't it, Chief? The silence in the chamber was deafening. The other cadets stared at Maya as if she had just detonated a thermal explosive. You did not negotiate with Chief Gorks. You survived him. I watched the Noxian's tentacles twitch. It was the biological equivalent of deep, conflicted thought. He looked at the shining pipes. He looked at the crude scoreboard. Then he looked down at the human who had orchestrated it all in less time than it took to process her paperwork. "Continue," Gorks finally grunted. He turned on his heel and retreated to his monitoring station, deliberately ignoring the unauthorized pulley system swaying above his head. The alien cadets erupted into quiet cheers. The Dromerian giant actually clapped Maya on the shoulder, nearly knocking her into the sludge. She just laughed, picked up her makeshift scraper, and pointed at the next filthy sector. "Let's get back to work," she yelled. "We have a high score to beat." I sank back into my command chair, my 3 hearts beating in a chaotic, terrified rhythm. I finally understood why the Galactic Council had been so terrified to admit humans into the Confederation. We had assumed they were chaotic. We thought they lacked the discipline required to maintain a galactic civilization. We thought our rigid, ancient systems would force them to conform. We were entirely wrong. Humans do not just endure broken systems. They view inefficiency as a personal insult. They look at misery and see a puzzle begging to be optimized. You cannot break a species that is pathologically addicted to improvement. I stared at the monitor, watching the human cadet orchestrate her team with flawless precision. The waste recycling chamber was no longer a punishment detail. It was a finely tuned machine, running faster and cleaner than any official military operation on my station. I had sent her down there to crush her spirit. Instead, I had just given the most dangerous problem solver in the galaxy her very first crew.